Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel deck profile. Today we're taking a look at the Hyper Engine Vast Vulcan Maximum deck, which has actually been doing a lot better than I had first expected. I think a lot of people kind of wrote this Maximum off because it's never really been a great Maximum in the physical game. Its effects are very lackluster. It's just kind of a burn tool. But as we've seen in Duel Links, burn decks do actually tend to be a lot stronger when your opponent has 2,000 less life points to actually burn through. So let's talk about the skill, Maximum Hyper Engine. So this skill can be used if the only monsters in your deck are spellcasters or warrior type monsters with 2100 or less attack, and the deck contains 8 or more maximum monsters. This basically says we have to run our Vast Vulcan. There's no other way that we can get this requirement. We have to run at least 8, so I guess if you wanted to, you could only run 2 of the middle piece. But for this deck, we're going to be playing all 3. This does also lock us into only spellcasters and warriors, which can get a little bit restrictive, but doesn't really matter overall. Now, maybe there are a few cards out of these types we'd like to include, but overall, I think the deck does work fine under these restrictions. But we can choose up to 2 face maximum monsters with 1500 less attack on your field. The chosen monsters gain 1000 attack until the end of your opponent's next turn. Then you can place 1 random maximum monster from your deck with a different level than the chosen monster on top of your deck. So this skill, at first glance, seems a bit naff. Basically, we can make one of our maximum monsters gain 1000 attack that does linger until the end of our opponent's next turn. Now, our monsters' attack are 1500, 900, and 600 respectively, which means we can get 1600, which is okay. 16 obviously will clear 15s, which is relevant, but oftentimes falls short of a number it really needs to hit. 19 is a lot better because 19 can clear 1800s, which means it will be able to attack over a lot of high defense monsters. We have been seeing a lot of things like Dark Magician Girl with a 1700 defense. We have been seeing Magician's Valkyrie with 1800 defense, so being able to clear those can actually be a lot more relevant. And our boss monster does get up to 25, but there is quite an obvious issue there in that it can't attack over other 25s. So that in itself can be a bit of a problem, but we have tried to mitigate that as much as we can. But being able to have a bunch of monsters that have a lot of attack can lead to you actually being able to bully your opponent with just a big board of attack monsters, which you wouldn't think this deck would be able to do, but actually it does quite well. Then finally we have the second part of the effect, which is placing 1 random maximum monster from your deck with a different level than the chosen monsters on top of your deck. So what this means is if we summon 2 different pieces onto the field and we use this skill, we will guarantee get that third piece on top of our deck. So in a lot of ways, we thought this skill would be kind of bad and very inconsistent, but actually it's been very, very consistent. I've actually found finding the maximum to be easier in this deck than the other maximum decks. So quite often we will just be tribute summoning out our middle maximum piece and then using this skill, putting either of the other 2 to the top of the deck, and then we're kind of golden. If we have another piece in our hand already, it's a 50-50 chance we hit the right one, and if we do hit the same card that we already have in our hand, we can just set the one in our hand because we know we're going to draw the other one in the next turn. So this skill actually pretty good. But let's go through the card by card. We'll start off with the maximum, I suppose. So Hyper Engine Vast Vulcan. Again, maximum attack, kinda low. 3300, not the best. Regular attack, 15. Awful. That is the lowest double tribute maximum monster attack that we have had so far. It is pretty terrible, and this really does hold the deck back because even with the skill, we still can't attack over those 25s. But this one is quite simply, while in maximum mode, this card cannot be destroyed by opponent's trap cards. Pretty generic. For our L piece, we have, while in maximum mode, send the top card of your deck to the graveyard, choose 1 face-up monster on your opponent's field, it loses 800 attack to the end of the turn. So most of the time, that's going to be it for this effect. We just reduce our opponent's attack in exchange for the top card of our deck, but it does have a little extra effect, is we can destroy 1 field spell on your opponent's field. If you destroyed a field spell card by this effect, inflict another 800 damage. Now this is only really going to work against worms because no one else is playing field spells, but it does come up occasionally, and an extra 800 does help. And then finally, our R piece is while in maximum mode. Again, we send the top card of the deck to the graveyard, so this does mill us quite quickly. But we can choose 1 face-up monster on the field. It loses attack equal to its level times 100 to the end of the turn, and then inflict damage to your opponent equal to the chosen monster's level times 100. So in an ideal world, we use this effect on our opponents. Level 7 is probably the most common, so it's going to lose 700 attack, our opponent's going to lose 700 life points. Then we're going to use our L piece to reduce it by a further 800, so it's now lost 1500 attack. Let's say the average is a 2500, so it's now gone on to 1000 attack. We'll then attack over it with our maximum and get in 2300 damage on top of the 700 burn that we've inflicted using our R piece, and we've just done 3000 damage. So all things considered, that works quite well. So then you wonder, well, your opponent's going to then change everything to defense if they can't out the max. But then we can start using our Hyper Engine Vast Vulcan R on ourselves, because we can reduce our own attack by 1000 because we're a level 10 monster, and then burn our opponent for 1000 damage, and then we've effectively got our opponent on a 3-turn clock where they have to find a way to out our max, which can be very oppressive if they just cannot find the out. So next up, we have Magician's Valkyria. So this card is in here basically because, one, we're limited in which legends we can actually use. We can only use spellcasters and warriors, so this is the only legend that's actually applicable to us other than the Dark Magician. And two, because it is a light spellcaster, we can use it with the Light Sorcerer of Sanctity. The Light Sorcerer of Sanctity is basically the way that we are able to kill 2500 attack monsters without maximum summoning. So Light Sorcerer, we can pay 300 life points, one face-up monster on your opponent's field, loses attack equal to the number of face-up light attribute spellcaster monsters on your field times 300 until the end of this turn. So this will let us weaken our opponent's monsters, clear them with the 25, or in some cases we can actually clear them with our 16 and 19 respectively, assuming that again they're boosted by our skill. So Light Sorcerer Sanctity does allow us again to clear problematic boards, but it also lets us play a decent aggro game, because to go along with this we are also playing the 1500 vanilla. Our monsters again become 16 and 1900 respectively, so we actually have quite a lot of attack points to actually throw around and bully our opponents to keep them low on resources, which against some decks can really cripple them. Machine is a deck that can build a board very quickly, but do have to find very specific pieces. A deck like Cyburst can build a board very, very easily without having very specific cards. You just need to find any normal summons and then any high levels and then use the skill. So not necessarily as good against that deck, but against a lot of decks, keeping their non-resources is going to be very, very useful. So Light Sorcerer Sanctity, very, very good card. Then we have the Piercing Samurai. Now, Piercing Samurai will not be able to be used in conjunction with our maximum while it's in maximum mode, because obviously the maximum takes up all 3 spots, so we won't be able to use Piercing Samurai, but it's still a very strong card. So if we have 3 face-up monsters on our field, we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard to choose 1 face-up warrior type monster on your field. If it attacks a defense position monster this turn, inflict piercing damage. Now notably, we can still use this with our 1900 attack Vast Vulcan L thanks to our skill, or our 2500 attack middle piece, again using the skill. And worst case scenario, we can just use it on itself, attack a defense position monster, and a lot of monsters in this game do have very low defense, sometimes even 0 defense. You just get in for even more damage. And again, this is effectively a aggro burn deck, so we are going to try and chip our opponent down for as much damage as we possibly can whenever we can. Next up, Siesta Torero, another fantastic staple monster. And again, it is a warrior, so we can play it in this deck. But we can shuffle 3 monsters from our graveyard into the deck. This in itself is very important because this lets us get our maximum pieces back into our deck, which we can then tutor out because of our skill, which can be very, very good. We can change an attack position level 8 or lower monster on our opponent's field to face down defense position. Then we can add Siesta Hold. Siesta Hold is irrelevant, we're not playing it because it's a terrible card. But being able to flip a monster face down does mean, again, we can out it using our very high attack monsters, or our Vast Vulcan can clear it, as long as it isn't something like a Yami Ruler or a Blue Eyes, because both the Blue Eyes and Yami Ruler are 2500 defense, so flipping it face down does not do anything for us. But notably as well, we can do some really good plays with Piercing Samurai. If our opponent has a 0 defense boss monster or 100 defense in the case of Cyburst, we can flip their monsters down and then just pierce over them for Piercing Samurai. We've cleared their boss monster and we've gotten some good damage in, so very good little combos. And that is going to do it for the monsters. So now we'll go on to our spells. And first off, we have our new legend card, the Warrior Returning Alive. Now, Warrior Returning Alive is very good in this deck. Obviously, we do have maximum monsters that are warriors, so it's basically like playing Monster Reincarnation, except we don't have that discard attached, which is very, very good. As well as the fact that we don't necessarily need to out our opponent's maximums, because we can burn our opponent through it, as well as the fact Vast Vulcan should be able to out anything anyway. Using the R piece, we can reduce a maximum monster's attack by 1000, and then using the L piece, another 800. So any maximum our opponent summons immediately is going to lose 1800, which means we can actually clear over a 5000 attack maximum monster, so we're not necessarily required to run Tribute to the Doom. Now, there will be some situations where Excavator can get above 5000, but those should be few and far between. and worst case scenario, we can still burn our opponent for a ton, so as long as we don't die on the crackback, we have a good chance to summon the maximum again and just burn them to death that way. But Warrior Returning Alive, fantastic card. Next up, we have Vulcan Ignite Hyperdrive. Now, this is a really cool spell, and I would sort of like to use more copies of this, but it can get a little bit bricky, and the spell trap space in this deck is quite tight. But if we have a face-up fire attribute warrior type maximum monster on your field, we can inflict 800 damage to our opponent. So again, all that burn does add up. If we have a monster in maximum mode on our field, we can then destroy one card on our opponent's field. So this is very good. First off, this lets us just pop a maximum if we really want to. This pops face up, face down, any level. It does not matter. We can also pop back row. So quite often, we will try and test the waters to see if our opponent has a slime or a negate attack or something along those lines. Then we'll ideally try and pop that negate attack using Hyperdrive and then kind of just go in for the kill. So Hyperdrive, very, very strong card. Again, we'd like to run more copies, but without having the maximum monster in maximum mode, this card can again just become a card that reads inflict 800 damage, which is still not terrible, right? That's still more than 10% of your opponent's life points. But a card that just burns sometimes will be really good and like close out a game, but sometimes will do absolutely nothing. For our Legend Trap, Negate Attack. Again, if you can play this card, you should play this card. This will keep our maximum monster around longer. It will stop maximum attacks. It is just so, so good. And pretty much, if our maximum monster survives, it can out just about anything. So Negate Attack to keep it around, very, very important. Then we have Buffered Slime. This is a card just to, again, keep us in the game longer. If we're getting bullied and we haven't found our maximum yet, we use Buffered Slime just to stay alive. Hopefully draw into the max the following turn, or just build a board that can out what our opponent has got. And then we have another new card, Heavenly Bliss. This card is actually really, really powerful. So when a monster on your field is destroyed by an opponent's attack or their card effect while you have no other monsters on your field, we can change one face-up monster on your opponent's field to defense position. So that in itself is really, really good. Flipping a monster down means that we can prevent an attack that would potentially be coming directly at our life points. And even if our opponent has run out of attacks, we can still flip something face down that has lower defense that has attack and then attack over it next turn, which is pretty good. But then this card has another effect. If the original level of the monster destroyed was 10, which includes our maximum mode, but also just our middle maximum piece, so if they do just out our 2500 attack middle piece, we can destroy one face down card in our opponent's field. So notably, we can obviously pop the monster that we flip face down using Heavenly Bliss, but also we could use this to pop our opponent's back row if we're planning to go for a big push the following turn, and again, we don't want to run into our opponent's negate attack. So Heavenly Bliss, really, really strong card. Then we have Combustion Crisis, and this is a bit of a suspect include. This card is really good and does just burn for 600, which again, that all adds up. But notably, this deck does have quite a bad matchup into the Machine deck, and Combustion Crisis can really help out in that matchup specifically, because if your opponent does summon double Steel Mechlord, it's very difficult to recover from that position, so Combustion Crisis is our way to try and stem the bleeding a little bit in this deck's what I would perceive to be its worst matchup. And then finally, we're on to Music Princess's Recital. This is just a card to stall out the game a little bit longer, but a lot of the time, your opponent will try to out your maximum by summoning out a big guy that can attack over it, or by using Talismanic Seal Array, and then they potentially only have 1 or 2 monsters that can attack to get rid of it. And Music Princess's Recital can protect our maximum while in maximum mode, which does make it really, really strong in this deck. So this is the list. Overall, this deck again has been performing a lot better than I had expected. This deck has a really, really good win rate for me. On top of the fact it is extremely fun to play. I didn't actually think this deck was going to be super fun. I did initially think after seeing the cards that this deck could potentially be an okay burn deck, and I do think it is an okay burn deck, but I don't think it's still going to make it above tier 3. Realistically, I think this deck is too inconsistent to out the big power decks right now, and thus isn't really going to break into those higher tiers. But it does have some pretty interesting matchups. This deck actually does pretty good into something like Cyberse. It does do okay into pretty much everything that isn't Machine, and like Royal Rebels can be a bit of a toss-up. It basically comes down to how often they can see Doom Metal. But against a lot of other decks, this deck actually has an okay time. Now, there are a couple of other cards I did want to briefly mention. The first one being Karatake, the Talismanic Warrior. We were playing this for a little bit, and it did actually work quite well. But when we were using this version of the build, we did not have the light sorcerers, which meant we were struggling to clear 2500 bosses, which is why we swapped off of it. But Karatake can be a very funny card. It burns your opponent for 200 for every spell and trap they have on their field. So ideally they'll have 3 spell traps, we'll burn them for 600. And then we combine that with Shitotsu, the Talismanic Warrior, who the idea behind playing this card was 1, to recycle the Karatake, but 2, to unbrick our hand if we open multiple copies of Vast Vulcan. But what we ended up finding, that if we do have 2 Vast Vulcan in hand, we can just tribute summon 1 out, then use our skill. We guarantee put a maximum piece at the top that is not our middle piece, and then we already have the middle piece ready to go for the following turn, at which point we have 3 chances to find the other piece and just be able to maximum summon on the following turn. But ended up feeling very consistent anyway, so we didn't end up needing the Shitotsu. But being able to use Karatake 2, sometimes 3 times in a turn can be very, very amusing, because burning them for 1800 out of nowhere is just really funny and can just close a game. But yeah, this is the deck. Again, actually more competent than we thought, very fun to play, and I would recommend it if you're looking for something a little bit different. But let's fire into some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.
Get it!